Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to be testing out the new Bijoux Brilliance collection from Mcgrath. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. So today we're going to be trying out the two large palettes from the Mcgrath Bijoux Brilliance collection for holiday 2023. So this collection also came with 4 quints. They did release this format for the first time last year, and I think the formula in those is wonderful. I did not pick up the quints this year though, just because none of the color stories particularly were speaking to me. She also released 3 Divine Blush, Bronze, and Glow trios, and they are $52 each. She did also release some colorful mascaras, which I definitely passed on. And then she did release 2 of these larger blush and eyeshadow palettes. These retail for $76 each, or $103 Canadian. So this collection has a lot to unpack. I feel like there is a ton of eyeshadow in this collection with the 4 quints and these 2 palettes. There's also a lot of blush. My order is actually pretty late because I also ordered one of the Blush, Bronze, and Glow trios because the shades in the lightest one are all shades that I don't have. So I did order that. I reached out to them this past week because it hadn't come in yet, and they told me that the reason my order hadn't shipped was because the trios were out of stock. So if you're still waiting on your order and you have one of those, that could be why. So that hasn't come in yet, but we are going to be playing with these today. So the boxes are really pretty. I think we can all agree. This kind of reminds me a lot of the Bridgerton collection with the bow and the ornate detailing. I think it's very beautiful though. So the first one we're looking at is Jeweled Temptation, and this is really pretty packaging. It is in her standard cardboard packaging that she does for holiday, but it does have these cutouts on the corners, which I do think is quite pretty. It is sort of, I guess, beveled along the side, and it actually does feel quite heavy for a cardboard palette. Opening this up, you do get a rather large mirror right here, and then you get 9 eyeshadows and 2 blushes. So I believe this is also a newer concept for Mcgrath. The blushes are made in Italy, and the eyeshadows are made in the US and imported ingredients, and these are assembled in the Dominican. So I believe last year's holiday palette was made in Italy. The one from the year before, the Celestial Odyssey, was also made in the US. So I'm thinking these are going to be the same formula as Celestial Odyssey. But this is what it looks like. Very pretty. This is the deeper of the 2 palettes. I should also mention the eyeshadows in here have a 12-month shelf life. The blushes have an 18-month shelf life. Going into the other palette, which is Starstruck Splendour. So the packaging looks just the same, but Starstruck Splendour has the pink bow and detail. So I like that she did them differently so you can tell the difference. This one is lighter, and this one is the one that I am more excited for because we do have these greens in here. I think this is super, super pretty. Between both palettes, these blushes are not repeat shades for me, so I'm really excited about that. I was worried there were going to be some repeats, but there is not. So I think what I'm going to do, in order to kind of get the most out of this review, I think with each palette, I'm going to create 2 different eyeshadow looks, and I'll use a different blush on each cheek so I can show you as much as possible. So like I mentioned, I think I'm going to start with Jeweled Temptation. And first of all, let's look at some swatches of this one, and then we'll get into creating our looks. I love that the blushes in here have the same embossment that her full-size blushes do. I think that's a nice touch. So for the blushes, we have Desert Amber and Paradise Venus. So I will have to go pretty light-handed with that one. That looks pretty deep, but Desert Amber looks beautiful. So for the eyeshadows, the first shade we have Coral Nectar. That's really pretty. I found it a bit chunky, honestly, on swatch, but it is really pretty and reflective. Then there is Amber Aura, Star Garnet, Daring Desire. So really nice. I feel like these swatched pretty nicely. Then we have Midas Mystique, also very pretty gold, Midnight Cherry, Smoldering Bronze, Blooming Sienna. I'm running out of room. And the very last shade is Amethyst Noir, which is very, very deep, but very, very pretty. I know in the most recent Mothership palette, the Sunlit Seduction, there's a purple in there that calls itself an amethyst. I feel like this is what I would have loved to see in that palette. I feel like that would have really added a little something extra. That's beautiful. So again, we will be creating 2 different looks. Let's start with Blooming Sienna, this one right here. Okay. I'm just really trying to blend this one into the crease in the outer corner. I feel like with this palette, I have to at least try to play with some of those more burgundy shades. At least for one eye. On the other eye, we can go just as neutral as I want to. This is actually blending out quite nicely. With a bit more of a detail brush, I'm going to go into Midnight Cherry. I kind of like these ribbons on the palette, these right here, because they do hold it up in case you want to use the mirror as like your vanity. I think that's really nice. I'm obviously not doing that right now. I still have the film over it. That's just because I don't want it to blind you guys, but I think that is a nice feature. That's a nice shade too, actually. It wasn't as boldly pigmented as I thought. Like, it was still very pigmented, but not as much as I thought. I was kind of nervous about going in with a shade like that. Okay, I think I'm gonna grab Star Garnet on a finger. It's just my favorite way to use Pat McGrath's shimmers. That's pretty. I don't necessarily love this type of shade on my eyes. I don't know exactly what it is about this shade, but I've never liked this type of shade on my eyes. Okay, I think I'm gonna go back in with Coral Nectar. I'm also going to take this one on a finger, and I want to apply this one to that inner portion of the lid. We're getting a lot of fallout, so I would recommend maybe wetting the brush. I'm just taking a smaller brush, and I want to go into that coral shade. And I just want to lightly put it on the inner corner. I just wanted a little bit more precision. And now I'm just adding a little bit of that wet shade to the lid as well. I ended up making it very pink when I did that, but in my opinion, a much more flattering shade of pink for my skin tone. So I'm not mad at that. Okay. Let's just get into the other eye. So for this side, we're probably going to focus a little more on these bronzy shades. I'm going to start with Amber Aura. And the reason I want to kind of focus on the bronzes over here is because I'm really interested in that gold. It just looks very, very beautiful. Normally, I'm not a big fan of those yellow golds, but there have been a couple times lately where I've created an all gold look on myself and really, really liked it. So this one is blending really well also. All right, just going back into Blooming Sienna. Using this one to deepen the outer corner and the crease. I'm thinking with these bronze shades, quite honestly, we pretty much have all of these, whether it be in Pat McGrath or in other palettes, but I do still think they're very pretty. I feel like the formula seems to be consistent with her past holiday palettes. I wouldn't say that it's completely up to par with her motherships, but it's definitely on par with some of her other holiday palettes. Okay, then just grabbing a little bit of Daring Desire. Same thing, just deepening up that crease a little bit more. I just did the tiniest dip because this palette is definitely a little bit deeper. I do love that she did 2 palettes, one being better for deeper skin tones, one being better for light skin tones. I love that she did the 3 different face trios. I think she did a really good job making this collection very inclusive. I'm not surprised. I feel like her line has always been pretty good that way. I do, however, feel that this collection was very eyeshadow heavy. I'm not complaining. We know I love eyeshadow. I do want to grab the Midas Mystique, which is this really pretty gold, and I am going to try to apply it with a wet brush, My favorite method, especially when it comes to Pat McGrath, is always a finger. I just think you get the best payoff. But I feel like that coral shade looked so nice after I went over it with a brush. So I do want to try this. Okay, I feel like I'm going to do the outline with the brush and then I'm going to go in with my finger because I don't feel like this is giving me the best result. I'm just kind of curving where I want that to go because I feel like that is a weakness when you go in with a finger. You lose a lot of that precision. Okay, do you see how much better that is with a finger? My goodness. And I did still get followed on the side, but not nearly as bad as the other side, which I'm grateful for. Okay, let me grab, okay, just taking another flat brush. I want to go into Smoldering Bronze. And I am going to do this one on a brush, and I want this one for that outer corner. That's quite pretty, actually. Okay, so I do want to dip back into Coral Nectar with a wet brush. And just a little bit, I want this one on that inner corner over here. Okay, I don't like it as much on that eye, but these are the two looks. Let me pop on some mascara. I'll show you the final look, then we will get into trying on the blushes, then we can jump into the other palette. Alright, so here are the two looks, and as always, I feel like mascara really put these together. I'm actually really liking this pinky look after I put on that coral shade. I think that's beautiful. Let's get into trying on the blushes. So I think the first one I want to try is Paradise Venus. This one's going to be a little bit deeper for my comfort zone. So I am going to pat a little bit off on my hand. And that's not actually too bad. Yeah, that shade doesn't actually look too bad. I was really worried about it being a little bit too deep. Okay, on the other side, let's go into Desert Amber. Okay, this shade I love. I think that's a really, really pretty shade. I will just mention these blushes seem a bit more powdery than usual. If you can see that, that is just from this blush. I'm not used to seeing that from her blushes, but otherwise these blush shades actually work really well for me. Desert Amber, the lighter one, I think is really, really nice. Really, really like it. I'm happy with that. I actually like both of these shades. I'm surprised I even like the deeper one. I would probably go in a little bit lighter with it. It would look better on a more medium to deeper skin tone than mine. Desert Amber, beautiful. The eyeshadows are fine. I think the quality is comparable to some of her past holiday palettes, but I don't think it's the top-notch quality that we're used to. So far, I think the mattes are really nice. They are pigmented, but not as pigmented as, say, like her motherships. And the shimmers are also quite pretty, but I find that that coral shade is the only one that worked really nicely with a brush. Even when I wet the brush. So I felt like my fingers were the absolute best application. I usually feel that way, but here we have two looks and a try on of both blushes with the Jeweled Temptation palette. Alright, let's get into Starstruck Splendor. So this is the lighter of the two palettes. I have gone ahead and done my swatches. So we have the two blushes right here. We have Nymphette and Coral Cosmos. Again, shades I do not already have. I remember when she first launched her blushes, Nymphette was very, very popular, and it was sort of similar, I would say, to Flirtatious that I have and love. So I did want that one, but it was always sold out, so I am excited to have it in here. Coral Cosmos also looks very, very pretty though. Looking at the eyeshadows, we have Opalescent Moonstone, which I am so excited about. How beautiful is that shade? It has like a pinky, it's pink, but it's got some gorgeous reflex in there. I think it's so stunning. Then we have Dawn Divinity, which really didn't swatch very well. And then Eternal Bronze. Then we have Forever Nude, Fawn Fantasia, Serene Sienna, Celestial Celadon, Gorgeous, Mythic Majesty, and Emerald Eclipse. Those greens are beautiful. You already know we're playing with the greens for sure. I feel like I've done a lot of green looks lately. I'm not mad at all. I love green eyeshadow, but let's hop into it. So I think the first look, I have to play with those greens. I think I'm going to start with Forever Nude as my crease shade. And this one seems to be leaning a little bit more pink, but it's pretty though, okay. I'm just running this one in the crease in the outer corner. I did leave on my mascara from the last look, just because it's so messy taking off mascara and then having to put it back on again. And I don't actually mind doing my eyeshadow around mascara because it kind of helps me pull the look together a little bit better. Okay, then I'm going to take Serene Sienna on the outer corner. Just blending, kind of really trying to enhance that outer corner a little bit. We don't have a ton of deep shades in this palette, which is fine with me. I'm definitely more comfortable with these lighter tones. I'm just going to take a little bit more of Forever Nude. I just want to build that crease up a little bit more because I know I want to go in with those greens. Okay, I think I'm going to split the lid between the two green shades because I think they're both so stunning. So I'm going to take Emerald Eclipse on a finger, and I want this one. That's so pretty. Okay. That's super beautiful. I don't know what it is, but I love a good green eyeshadow. I'm just blending those edges a little bit. That is a beautiful, beautiful green. Okay, I'm gonna grab Celestial Celadon, and this one is going on the inner portion. That's pretty too. That's frosty, but that is pretty. They make a really pretty gradient. Just blending around those edges a little bit. All right, so there we have the completed look with the green shadows. I think these are so pretty. I feel like I would prefer this look if I had some actual green mattes. So I feel like I would probably dip into another palette to create this look again, but it still feels really pretty. I still really like it. I just think I would like it a little bit more if I had some green matte. So that being said, I love that we have some greens from Pat Mcgrath. Let's get in to look number 2. My plan for look number 2 is to go very simple. I'm going to start with Forever Nude again, and then this one is just going to go in the crease just like the other one. This is a really beautiful crease shade. I think it's really pretty. Okay, then I'm just going to take the littlest bit of Mythic Majesty for the outer corner. And like I said, this look is going to be very simple. And that's really pretty too, actually. Okay, now the part I'm most excited for, going into Opalescent Moonstone on a finger. And this one's just going all over the lid because I think it's super beautiful. How beautiful is that shade? I mean, you could use this as an inner corner shade if you wanted, whatever you wanted to do. I was just really feeling this whole super pretty light wash of color kind of situation. How pretty is that? Like it's like a pink, but it's got like blue and green reflect. I think that's so pretty. I'm actually going to take a little bit of that shade on a brush and see how it looks as the inner corner shade over here. See, it's even really pretty with those greens. But I love it as the main lid shade. Just a little bit to sort of define the eye, and then all over the lid. That's so, so beautiful. Okay, let's get into trying on the blushes, and then I will share my final thoughts. All right, let's get into trying on these blushes. I think it's safe to say I am much happier with this palette than the first one. I think that's mostly just because it is more geared toward my skin tone, but let's start with Coral Cosmos because this is the one I'm most curious about. This is probably a really, really beautiful summery kind of blush. That's pretty though. It's not as bright and kind of intimidating, I think, as it looks in the pan, which I love. So it looks really pretty. Okay, I'm going to do Nymphette on the other side. Ooh, Nymphette is more pigmented than I expected. It's pretty though. I would probably go in a little lighter next time, but I wasn't expecting it to be so pigmented. I was definitely expecting it to look a little bit more like Flirtatious, which is a very muted blush shade. Okay, so we have Coral Cosmos and Nymphette. Nymphette also seems to have a bit of a sheen to it, whereas Coral Cosmos I think is more of a classic matte blush. So that's one thing I wanted to mention as well. But here are both blushes and two different looks with the Starstruck Splendour palette. Definitely preferred this palette over the first one we tried. Let me pop off camera. I'm going to match up my eyeshadow and my blush, and I will be back to share my final thoughts. All right, so let's talk about my final thoughts. We tried out 2 eyeshadow palettes and 4 different blushes today. My thoughts on Jewel Temptation, which is the deeper palette. I was pleasantly surprised with the blushes. I love that the shades still work for me, even though this one looks like it's going to be way too deep. It actually works, and I think it's beautiful. I love Pat McGrath's blush formula so much. The eyeshadow formula is a little bit different than what we typically see from Pat. I noticed that sometimes for her holiday collections and some of her more limited edition collections, even her Valentine's Day collection this year, the eyeshadows are made in the US as opposed to her Italian formula, which is in all of her motherships. So I found that kind of interesting. But these shades were still very, very beautiful. This coral nectar shade, absolutely stunning. This amethyst noir shade also looks so beautiful. Quite honestly, I didn't know how to make it work today, so I didn't play with it, but the shades that I did play with, I was very impressed with. I thought they all performed quite well. I think I used every shade except this one, and I thought they performed quite well. I think the mattes were a little bit less pigmented than what we would say fine from her Italian formula in her motherships, but they still blended out very easily and performed very well. They were just a bit more on the buildable side, so if you prefer more buildable shadows as opposed to very heavily pigmented shadows, you might prefer this matte formula a little bit better. The shimmers were still very beautiful. I definitely find that the best way to work with the shimmers in here is definitely with the fingers. I tried with a brush. Typically I don't even bother trying with a brush because I just know I like to use my fingers when it comes to shimmer shadows. But today I did try a brush, and honestly I just wasn't that impressed, especially with this gold shade. So I do think these perform much better if you use a finger. Again, I did spray my brush and I still didn't have a ton of luck. So I like this. I think it's going to be better for those more medium to deeper skin tones, but I still think it's really, really pretty. I will get some use out of these shadows. Again, this coral shade is stunning. That being said, the color story really isn't that special. I mean, if we were even just to cover up this row, you have a very neutral eyeshadow palette. So, I mean, is it anything super new and unique? Not really, especially from Pat McGrath. But I would definitely say my favorite of the two goes to Starstruck Splendour. So this is the lighter of the two. So I kind of had a feeling it would be my favorite for a couple reasons. Because first of all, it is the lighter of the palettes. So I knew I was going to love the blushes. I knew I was going to like the shades a little bit better, but also we have some greens in here, which I was really excited about. And then this opalescent moonstone shade. I love this shade so much. It's unreal. I was very excited about the emerald green in here, but I wanted to compare it to the Charlotte Tilbury Hypnotizing Pop Shot that she released for holiday last year, because this was my favorite of all of the pop shots. So up here we have the Pat McGrath, and on the bottom we have the Charlotte Tilbury. I like the Charlotte Tilbury better. There is a slight difference in shade. This one is definitely brighter, but the Charlotte Tilbury also has a lot more shine and impact, I would say. So not identical. I also did quickly want to look at the Celestial Odyssey palette from 2 years ago, which was also a made in the US palette, because the greens in here looked similar. They're not identical. We have the greens from Starstruck Splendour, and then we have the green from Celestial Odyssey. So you can see they are all different shades of green. I feel like we were all very, very excited for that green because Pat doesn't come out with a lot of greens. Looking at the palette in comparison to this year's, I think this year's is a little bit more muted in comparison. Looking briefly at last year's color story, I think she really went for it when it came to color with these purples. We have this green, which I think I would like to play with in conjunction with these. So pairing these two palettes might be a good idea. That's always a fun idea too, but last year was definitely the most colorful outside the box palette I've seen from Pat McGrath in recent years. But overall, this palette, I think, same comments when it comes to formula as the Jeweled Temptation. Definitely more buildable mattes. The shimmers are definitely really, really beautiful. This shade here really has my heart. I think it's stunning. But overall, this palette is definitely my very favorite between the two. It's just lighter. It has the greens. It has that opalescent shade. I think they're both beautiful. I think this one is better for me, and I think it's going to be better for anyone with more fair skin. But I think Jeweled Temptation is a great option for those who have more medium to deeper skin tones. I think you'll really get a lot of enjoyment out of both of these. I do hope that my face trio comes in because it also has a blush, a bronzer, and a highlight in shades I don't have. So I am excited for that as well. But overall, I think this collection is really pretty. I like the packaging. I think it's really nice. Is it my favorite holiday collection that's come out so far? Not quite. I think that is still the Charlotte Tilbury. To be honest with you, there's just something about that palette that speaks to my heart. I still think they're very, very pretty, and if you were on the fence, I would definitely recommend them, especially if you don't already have a lot of her blushes and you'd like to expand on that. I think this is a nice option as well. I do love her blush formula, and it is her typical Italian formula that is so good, so easy to work with, looks so beautiful on the cheeks. I do love her blushes. The eyeshadows are okay. It's not her very best formula, but it's by no means a bad formula. I am glad I picked them up. I do think if I didn't want to review them, I probably would have skipped Jeweled Temptation from the very beginning. I knew I wanted the greens. So I think when it comes to Pat McGrath's holiday collections, I think last year's might have been a favorite. I really like Celestial Odyssey too, quite honestly. I really like these. I think this year was very eyeshadow heavy, but I think last year was a favorite simply because of the Celestial Nirvana palette having a lot more color options, but also the quints were so fabulous last year. So I think that was a favorite. When it comes to this year's quints, obviously I can't speak to those, just the color stories didn't speak to me as much, but these are really nice, and I like that I now have 4 new blush shades from Pat McGrath. So overall, I think the 2 large palettes are a pretty nice collection. I do prefer Starstruck Splendour for myself. Otherwise, I think it's really nice, but that is it for me today. Let me know down below if you picked up anything from this collection. Let me know your thoughts. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!